is my favorite flour to use. It can help to reduce inflammation and can help those with irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, high cholesterol, blood flow, and fatty liver disease better than conventional wheat. Hi friends, wondering which flour is the healthiest? Well, it's not what you think. In this video, we're going to go over the most common flours on the market and look at the nutritional content and its physical chemistry to pick the healthiest flour for baking and cooking. Have you ever wondered what makes the bread chewy, soft, fluffy, and moist? To get that perfect texture, it's helpful to understand some basic cooking chemistry. The basics of the texture is determined by the ratio of protein and carbohydrate. It can make a huge difference in how healthy a processed food is. Your bread is chewy due to a protein called gluten in wheat, barley, and rye. If you can find whole grain rye flour, you may want to consider adding that as a staple of your pantry if you eat flour. Rye has lignans, which are considered to be protective against cancers. The metabolites of lignin can actually be measured in the urine. Breast cancer-free survivors had higher metabolites of lignans compared to those who relapsed. And in Sweden, men with prostate cancer had more cancer cells dying off with lower PSA values when they ate rye. And kids who ate rye had 50% less aggressive prostate cancer as adults. If you haven't heard, the first 2 decades of life appear to be very important to influence a child's risk of developing cancer later as an adult. So, not getting sunburned and eating lots of cancer-protective foods are super important for children. The most common flour sold is made out of wheat. So if you buy bread flour or all-purpose flour, that is all wheat flour, sort of. I'll explain why it's not really whole wheat flour later. If the flour has too much gluten, the texture will be chewier. Glutenin and gliadin are 2 proteins in wheat, barley, and rye that gives the bread its elasticity. As you knead your dough, protein bonds are broken and reconnect with water to form gluten. The more you knead the dough, the stronger and longer the gluten strands become, making it stretchy like pizza dough. Over kneading can cause the dough to be tough and chewy, and that means too much gluten is formed. You can actually reverse some of this chewiness by allowing the dough to rest to increase its elasticity. I'm sure some of you are professional bakers and can explain this chemistry so much better. I was an amateur baker, but I gave that hobby up because it made me gain weight. Weight gain ultimately comes down to calories consumed, which is determined by your appetite and then by the volume of food you eat. And your appetite is dependent upon so many factors, including how your food smells. I love the smell of baked bread. There are over 540 distinct volatile compounds released in the air when you bake bread, and it actually triggers a Pavlovian response, an innate response to feel good. That's why baking took off in 2020. There is even a National Family Bread Baking Month declared by President Ronald Reagan in 1987. He encouraged families to bake bread at home to create those Pavlovian aromas to elicit the same response in our children. This is a classic recipe to make an addict of bread. And our bread really is not so healthy because we hide so many chemicals in bread. Baking with powdered food is not like mixing colors in concrete. In concrete, you will actually see it's been tampered with, but when you look at baked items, it's hard to tell what's really hidden inside. More caloric ingredients such as fat and added sugars easily transform a low-calorie slice of bread to a high-calorie slice of junk food. So even though it's light and fluffy, that bread you're eating is calorie dense, and you don't really have to eat a lot of it to gain weight. You just need to eat highly calorically dense foods. Low fiber flour is easier to chew and easier to convert to pure sugar, glucose. Eating flour with bran can actually slow down your digestion. It slows down the breakdown of starch into glucose. This prevents sugar spikes. This is because bran is rich in fiber. Fiber also helps to lower cholesterol. This complex gets expelled in the toilet. Now, I'm sure you have seen the labels of heart healthy and high fiber processed foods. And this is because fiber also lowers inflammation through several other mechanisms. And one of them is through your gut microbiome, which ferments fiber into anti-inflammatory short chain fatty acids like butyrate. And many foods have fiber, but cereal fibers appear to be especially beneficial to lower inflammation and reduce the risk of heart attacks and strokes. There's also a feedback loop connecting fiber to your appetite. The more fiber you eat, the less hungry you feel through the activation of GLP-1. Whereas when you eat less fiber, you stay hungry and therefore you will simply eat more food when you don't eat enough fiber. But flour also makes people gain weight through the physical transformation of increasing the surface area of the food, and this also allows molecules to pack more tightly together, therefore creating calorie density. You can grind so many foods and transform it into another texture. Take nuts. You can actually make nut butters yourself. It's delicious. Nuts don't become powder because there's just a lot of fat in nuts, and that's why milling is designed to remove the germ of the grain. The germ is the highest in fat. So in the end, you have a low fiber, low fat, and high carbohydrate processed ingredient. To illustrate calorie density, I'm going to show you the difference in food between whole peanuts and peanut butter. It takes 540 peanuts to make 12-ounce jar of peanut butter. So you are eating roughly 7.5 peanuts per teaspoon. You can't fit 7.5 peanuts on a teaspoon. I have here a teaspoon. I'm going to show you that 7 peanuts can't fit on a teaspoon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You see how it's not flat? But if you pulverize the peanuts and you make them all tiny little specks, I'm sure it would fit much better. Now, when you put food in a food processor, you destroy the fiber because the fiber loses its structure, it loses its shape. And by doing so, you have destroyed some of the fiber's function, which is to hold nutrients. And as a result, your body will easily access those nutrients inside the food. And if the food is high in carbohydrates, like grains, then it will spike your blood sugars. And hence, this is why eating a whole grain in whole food form and not a whole grain bread is so much healthier. Now, there are lots of breads that are supposedly whole grain food but have added fiber. Now, I did a whole bread video to explain why added fiber is not necessarily healthy for the body. It's like adding sucrose. Both fiber and sucrose are naturally found in plants, and I think many people would agree adding sucrose does not make a food healthier. And unlike sucrose, fiber is not one ingredient, and many fibers are also emulsifiers, so high concentrations in your food are actually inflammatory. I used to drink plant milks with carrageenan, thinking it should be safe as it is a dietary fiber. Then I learned that carrageenan was used as an irritant in lab animals for research, and now more and more studies are showing that these added fibers can be inflammatory. Inulin, psyllium husk, citrus fibers are also common fibers added to breads. Now, I understand that bread baking is really food chemistry, and these fibers serve as binders, texturizers, and stabilizers. Tasty food and healthy food are often two opposing goals. There is another problem with bread, specifically those made out of wheat. Not everyone can tolerate gluten. There are many gluten-free options, but gluten-free doesn't mean it's actually healthier, except for people who have gluten allergies or sensitivities. I have lots of friends and patients who have gluten sensitivities. People with celiac disease or gluten sensitivities can have a myriad of GI symptoms when they eat gluten. And these symptoms can include diarrhea, bloating, abdominal pain, and even constipation. Now, if you have any of these GI symptoms, see your medical doctor. A simple blood test called tissue transglutaminase IgA antibody is very sensitive to diagnose celiac disease. Ironically, lots of celiac allergic people have actually no symptoms. Avoiding gluten products is critical for those with celiac because gluten triggers chronic inflammation starting from the gut. Now, you can also have allergies to other wheat proteins such as albumin, globulins, and gliadins. And some people can get a skin rash called dermatitis herpetiformis from eating wheat. People with eczema and asthma are more prone to food allergies. And in fact, oftentimes the food allergy probably came first and then that caused skin and respiratory conditions. A daily food diary is super helpful to figure out what your body can or cannot tolerate. Now, there are several types of wheat flour. So I'm going to stick to the health aspects of these flours, or the video will be 2 hours long. First, all wheat flours are made from specific strains of wheat grown to be floured, and they are all a rich source of carbohydrates, specifically starch, from the wheat kernel's endosperm. So if you need metabolic energy, that is a part of the grain you want to eat. Unfortunately, this is also the problem with highly processed foods, as that endosperm is easily broken down into sugar. Now, to protect the body from simple sugar, milling flour is the worst thing you can do with that kernel. The milling process just removes the bran and the germ, so only the carbohydrate-rich endosperm is left. So really fine ground flour, like white flour and cake flour, are the worst. Sodium is also overconsumed and responsible for the majority of our metabolic diseases. So any flour that has added sodium is a no-no in my book, and self-rising flour has added sodium. Usually your food should have more complete nutrients, so anything that has more than just starch is a plus in my book. So bread flour, all-purpose flour, whole wheat flour, white whole wheat flour, and gluten flour are more nutritious because they have more protein. Now, of these flours, gluten flour has the most protein, but I hope you're not eating wheat as your protein source. The greatest benefit of eating wheat would be to get its unique phytonutrients, and that means you have to go for wheat that is colored and wheat that has fiber. Less than 10% of Americans eat enough dietary fiber. You don't technically need fiber to survive, but you do need it for longevity. By looking for the fiber content in your flour, you can exclude all the flours that have low fibers, so that leaves just whole wheat flour and white whole wheat flour. And between the two, the whole wheat flour is healthier because the white flour is made from wheat that has less color. And when you don't have that color, you don't have phytonutrients like polyphenols that can help reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and feed your gut microbiome. Now, many people don't think any amount of bread is healthy. Well, that depends on your underlying metabolism. Now, when you grind grains to a fine powder, you increase the surface area so that your digestive enzymes can easily access those nutrients for absorption. Have you seen 00 flour? This is a great way to gain weight, as this is known as a 00 flour, a super fine white flour from Italy and considered the best for making pasta and pizzas. They really should call it double size, as the finer the powder, the easily you will absorb the nutrients and gain weight. And if this is your diet, don't be surprised when you are gaining double-digit weight. If you want flour with a lesser impact on your weight, then go for a coarse ground flour like stone ground. Powdered food is advantageous for people with absorption issues, like those with inflammatory bowel disease or short gut syndrome. Generally, these people struggle to gain weight because they can't absorb most of the nutrients that they're eating. And by changing the size of the food, you can significantly increase how much of the calories you absorb. So eating a whole peanut is around 40% less caloric than eating peanut butter. And likewise, eating a whole wheat kernel is less caloric than eating powdered food that is glued back together and injected with air like bread. And you will easily digest food that has been pulverized to a fine powder, especially when the bran or fiber is removed. And this is true whether it's a bread or cereal. Now, if it has a bran, it should slow down digestive enzymes. And if you bake bread with airy bubbles, then that bread will easily dissolve faster when it hits your digestive tract because the air increases the surface area. So fluffy bread is pretty much eating straight sugar. And do you see how bread can make you gain weight, which is helpful for people who are struggling with weight gain? Otherwise, bread can be a metabolic time bomb for anyone else who's struggling with their blood sugars and reducing their weight. If you are struggling with carbohydrate metabolism diseases like fatty liver and diabetes, reduce your bread intake. And when you do eat bread, make sure it has the outer layers of natural fibers and not added fiber. A plant has more than one type of fiber which resides in the outer layers, including both soluble and insoluble fibers. If you're eating 2,000 calories, you should be aiming for at least 30 grams of fiber at the minimum over the course of a day. Now, if you are like 90% of the rest of the country, then your diet is seriously fiber deficient. If you're constipated, you are likely not eating enough insoluble fiber, which provides bulk and softens your food so that your intestinal muscles can squeeze the waste down the toilet. This is an active process and requires your muscles to have the energy and strength for you to have a bowel movement. Now, I'm sure you've seen fitness gurus work out at the gym. They're easy to spot. They're the ones with the big muscles. If they didn't work out often, they wouldn't be able to lift weights and have big muscles. And your intestines are also made out of muscles, and its workout is passing stool. So if you don't have a bowel movement every day, your colon won't get a workout and you will struggle with being bloated, uncomfortable, especially when you increase your fiber intake. And this is because fiber draws in water, adding weight and distension to the colon. You need muscle to hold that up. Soluble fiber also forms a gel-like texture. That's why oatmeal is kind of gooey. That fiber is even more beneficial beneficial for your metabolism. The gel traps all sorts of undesirable ingredients like cholesterol from recirculating or toxins like heavy metals that shouldn't be absorbed. In addition, it slows down the absorption of nutrients that can make you gain weight, like fats, proteins, and sugars. This process allows the body to acclimate to eating, and it prevents the surge of calories. The most unique part of soluble fiber is that it is the preferred food for your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome ferments that soluble fiber into beneficial molecules like acetic acid that can increase your metabolic rate by activating an enzyme called AMP kinase. So when you make more ATP, you lose weight. In other words, you can increase your metabolism by eating fiber. In addition, certain microbes ferment soluble fiber into beneficial short-chain fatty acids such as butyrate. That's the energy molecule for your colonic cells so that it has the energy to push your waste down the toilet. It's like that pre-workout drink. Butyrate is also very anti-inflammatory. It can help to heal leaky gut as well as other conditions causing inflammation. When you eat real food, nature has the right proportions in fiber. This is why it is beneficial to eat a diversity of whole plant foods. Sure, you can buy added fiber like high fiber cereals and breads. You can even take fiber supplements. But when you do that, you're missing out on the phytonutrients that are attached to the original fiber when you eat the original whole food. And these phytonutrients, they also talk to your gut microbiome, and they inhibit pathogenic strains and encourage anti-inflammatory strains to flourish in your gut. However, eating added fiber is sort of like drinking protein shakes to replace real food. There are thousands of phytonutrients which are easily lost during food processing. And when you eat flour, you are essentially eating starch. Starchy foods elevate your blood sugars, and that is really a normal process. But how long your blood sugars stay elevated is more of a problem than the actual spike. It's best to keep bread to an occasional treat and not to make it a staple food if you're worried about blood sugars, especially those made out of refined flour, because they have high glycemic loads as well as a high glycemic index. The glycemic load is a number that compares the potential of foods containing the same amount of carbohydrate to raise your blood sugar. It is a calculated number based on the food's glycemic index. The glycemic index measures how quickly your blood sugars will rise after you eat the food. The food that has the highest glycemic index is white bread. This is why nobody should be eating white flour. It's not a health food. Glycemic load is calculated by multiplying the glycemic index of food times the available carbohydrates per serving and dividing that number by 100. A high glycemic load is over 20. Now, the glycemic index of food doesn't always correlate with the glycemic load of foods. For example, let's compare a donut and a watermelon. They both have the glycemic index of 76, but a watermelon has a glycemic load of 8, whereas a donut has a glycemic load of 17. Now, here is a list of some common foods and their glycemic loads and glycemic index. Now, I find it pretty cumbersome to have to look up charts to eat. So the shortcut to eating carbohydrates is to make sure that you eat carbs with intact fiber. Basically, stay away from foods that have a middleman or a middle food company. So a whole wheat kernel is so much healthier than a piece of bread, which had not only a middleman, but also a miller and a baker. Yes, baking bread at home can be a little bit healthier as you can control the added ingredients. And if you can find organic whole wheat flour, that would be even better. Now, why is organic important? Well, it means that the crops are not genetically modified and no synthetic pesticides or fertilizers were used. Apparently, there is no commercial genetically modified wheat for sale as of 2023. And to be clear, just because a plant is organic, it doesn't mean it's actually safer than conventional. For example, organic cocoa beans have more heavy metals than non-organic cocoa beans, so I actually avoid eating organic chocolate. Organic plants can also use pesticides, but the USDA says that organic foods do have fewer pesticide residues. Pesticides are really a big problem to farm workers as they put them at risk for higher cancer rates, especially for those who live close to the area that's being sprayed. Now, the reason why I prefer organic is because in general, organic plants have more antioxidants. I also prefer ancient grains as they have more pigment like lutein and zeaxanthin, two carotenoids that improve eyesight. These plant phytonutrients can help to reduce inflammation and can help those with irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, high cholesterol, blood flow, and fatty liver disease better than conventional wheat. So if you can get some stone ground, organic, ancient, whole kamut and spelt, that would be much healthier than common whole wheat flour. Now, if you're buying organic, then you shouldn't find any bleached flour. Bleached flour is flour treated with chemicals to make it finer, fluffier, whiter, brighter, and softer. Chemicals are obviously not food and should not be in our food supply. Now, you don't need a lot to have metabolic consequences, so I prefer not to have any in my food. Now, the next flour that is commonly found is coconut flour. Coconut flour, unlike coconut milk, is lower in saturated fat. However, it still has saturated fat. The trifecta or triple threat to carbohydrate metabolism needs saturated fat as a lighter to cause fatty liver, high blood sugars, and obesity. And you can either make it yourself by overeating calories, or you can eat saturated fat in your food. Now, when it comes to long, even chain saturated fats, that's mostly found in dairy, meat, and eggs. And this causes insulin resistance through actually a few mechanisms. First, it reduces the insulin receptors on the cell surface, and then it is also a source of toxins through breakdown products of the saturated fat that ultimately increases oxidative stress, inflammation, and mitochondrial dysfunction. Unlike glucose, saturated fat doesn't need a gatekeeper to get into the cell, since your cell membrane is also made out of fat. It can literally slide right through and accumulate in your muscle tissues. That's marbleized meat, except it's happening in your tissue. Your muscles are abundant in mitochondria, or they should be, because they need to crank out energy in a hurry when you use your muscles. But if you're struggling with energy and fatigue, something is happening with your mitochondria, as that is the epicenter of where carbohydrate metabolism happens. Have you ever waited in the Costco return line the day after Christmas? I've seen it back up all the way around the parking lot. When your mitochondria doesn't work, that's what happens to your glucose. And if you check your blood sugars, you will see them persistently high, as a parking lot of your glucose is your blood vessels. So if you want to lower your blood sugars, then you either have to give up eating carbohydrates, then you won't see sugar spikes at all, which means you'll be missing out on the other vital phytonutrients and fiber that comes with those foods. Or you can continue to eat carbohydrates and you can give up saturated fat. This study showed that just a couple of days of changing your diet can improve your carbohydrate metabolism, which translates into lower blood sugars after eating carbohydrates. Now, if you never eat carbohydrates, you really don't know if you fix your carbohydrate intolerance until you give yourself a carbohydrate challenge. A successful challenge means you can eat carbohydrates and not spike your blood sugars as high. And this means you're more insulin sensitive. Now, coconut oil is 90% saturated fat, mostly lauric and myristic acid. Only 10% are caprylic and capric medium chain saturated fat oils. And you may have heard that medium chain fatty acids are better. Well, they are not in terms of elevating your cholesterol, but coconut oil is mostly long chain saturated fats. And when it comes to inflammation, coconut oils are much worse than other vegetable oils, and you will increase your LDL cholesterol, the one associated with atherosclerosis, blood vessel inflammation, even though it actually doesn't have any cholesterol. And this is why coconut flour is not a healthy option. Now, how about almond flour versus almond meal? Almond flour is blanched with boiling water to remove the peel, and it is ground to a finer particle. Almond meal would be better as it is made from unpeeled almonds, whereas almond flour has been peeled. As a result of the peel, almond meal is a coarser flour. It has more antioxidants and double the iron and calcium. Eating the whole almond would be the best option, as that has been shown to be helpful in not gaining weight. Now, regularly eating almonds may also reduce the risk of osteoporosis. The one drawback of almond flour is that it is high in fat. And remember, it's very easy to overeat highly processed food, which translates into weight gain. Now, in general, a handful of nuts a day is a good portion size, but a handful of powdered almond flour will take at least twice as many whole nuts to make. Have you seen arrowroot flour? It's basically a starchy tuber or root that is higher in protein than most roots. It also has an impressive amount of iron, folate, and potassium. And the other neat thing about arrowroot is that 32% of its starch is in the form of resistant starch. Resistant starch is a form of carbohydrate your body cannot digest. Functionally behaves like soluble fiber when it's mixed with water because it forms a gel. And as a result, you get the feeling of being full and you also eat less. Resistant starches are also helpful when you're having loose stool so that you can bulk up your stool, and at the same time, it can help relieve constipation. Now, even though your body can't digest resistant starches, your gut microbiome can. And so Arrowroot is considered a good source of prebiotics to also support your immunity. By mixing your whole grain flour with some Arrowroot, you can reduce the calories of the food. By the way, it's also a gluten-free flour. Another gluten-free grain high in resistant starch is buckwheat. Despite its name, it is not a true wheat and has no gluten protein. Buckwheat has unique fibers called phagopyridol and D-chryroinositol that has been shown to reduce blood pressure and cholesterol and can help blunt the spikes of table sugar. Now, oat flour is another gluten-free grain that is easy actually to make at home. Just grind your rolled oats in a high-speed blender or food processor. Now, keep in mind the laws of chemistry apply, and pulverizing your food will increase its ability to get digested sooner, and it also increases its calorie density. Oats are very nutritious and a good source of a variety of vitamins and minerals. They also have been shown to help keep people fuller longer. This translates into less food as well as reduced insulin resistance. This can happen as quickly as 2 days. Oat flour is definitely, in my book, a healthier flour to eat. Now, cassava or yucca root is another starchy root grown in the tropics. It is used to make tapioca and gari, two other starches. Cassava is also high in resistant starch, unlike tapioca, which is mostly sugar. If you're gluten-free, you're probably considered garbanzo bean flour. Actually, this is an ancient staple flour around the world, making delicious recipes like falafels in the Middle East to breads in India and Argentina. And when I visited Argentina, I was really surprised to learn that they upgraded their pizza with a garbanzo bean bread topping called faina. This actually transforms pizza into a healthier pizza sandwich for the average person. Apparently, the origins of the chickpea pancake came from northern Italy. Imagine how we can transform the health of our nation if we can get pizza parlors to serve chickpeas as well. Beans and chickpeas are a great source of fiber and protein, which help to regulate blood sugar levels, suppress appetite, and prevent weight gain. Beans even work the day after you eat them, and this is called the second meal effect. I know this is easier said than done because beans can make people feel bloated. And this is because the fiber draws in a lot of water, and you have to have the right equipment, the right microbes to stabilize them. So like an athlete, you have to train your gut to work up to tolerate a cup of beans. Open a can of beans and just start with eating 1 bean a day. It's best to do it with your meals. Then each day add another bean with another meal. I keep doing this every day. It's okay to freeze cooked and canned beans and then defrost them. They really don't taste any different to me. It may take you several weeks to work up to eating a cup of beans per meal, and that's okay. Now the goal is to eat at least 3 cups a day. Chickpea flour is my favorite flour to use. I eat and make chickpea flour foods, and you can find them in large bags at the Indian and Middle Eastern grocery stores with different grain sizes. And this is perfect for those who are gluten-free too. Most gluten-free products are made of rice flour. Brown rice is a whole grain, whereas white rice flour is not. I used to love Japanese rice crackers, Asian noodle dishes, and Asian tamales made out of white rice flour. They are delicious, but I don't eat them anymore because they are made out of white rice flour, which is essentially starch that easily gets converted to sugar. But the real reason why I avoid rice is due to its arsenic content. Rice in general have 10 times more arsenic than other grains. It's also impossible for you to rinse any of the arsenic out when the rice has been powdered. If you want to use brown rice flour, then you may want to source the rice grown in a low arsenic field. And if you want to learn more about where to get that rice from, watch the next video.